7. And of course, if you check your time, you know that it is time for the Tech Talk Wednesday show. Kazim is here. Of course, he has another exciting topic for you this afternoon. So if you missed out last week, he's going to be nice enough to do a recap, just a brief recap, to tell you what you missed and, of course, lead you on to what he has for you this afternoon. Good to have you again in the studio.
Thank you very much, Chocolate. Good afternoon, and good afternoon, listeners. So on the show today, I'll do a quick recap of what we've been learning about cloud computing so far, and we'll call it a wrap today.
Finally.
Yes, on cloud computing, and hopefully next week, so we can move on to something totally new. Power series, I like to call it.
Okay.
So there's going to be a lot of
can't
energy
wait.
from that. So, to do a recap of what we've been learning thus far on cloud computing, so I'd like to do the recap using this 5 characteristics of cloud computing. So I think with these features of cloud computing, it should help us do a summary of what we've been learning about cloud computing so far. So number 1 characteristics of cloud computing is on-demand self-service. So what this means is that people have the ability to create services when they need it, as that when needed. In fact, they can even orchestrate it in such a way that those services are created without the need to have an human interaction, in place. So that's one of the characteristics of cloud computing. Another characteristics of cloud computing is something called rapid elasticity. Rapid elasticity. That is, you get to set a threshold where once that threshold is hit, things can automatically spin up as needed. A good example here will be, let's call it JAM. I believe a number of us can relate to the JAM exercise going on at the moment. So JAM have a number of servers. So let's just look at it that JAM is taking advantage of cloud computing, that they have a number of their servers sitting in some of the data center of these cloud providers, or they have, their own data centers. So it would be nice for them to start with a few number of servers, maybe 2-3 number of servers, and as they get more requests coming in, the servers can automatically scale. The server can automatically become 4, 5, 10, depending on the number of requests that comes into the server. So that's, rapid elasticity. Another feature of cloud computing is something known as measured service. So it means that the services that you are running in the cloud are measured. So they are metered. It's not a scenario where you're paying for what you're not consuming. So at the end of the day, once you go with any of the cloud provider, for instance, you're doing Azure, at the end of the month, you get a billing that you can look into that is very well verbose. So you can see how much utilization, how much of this particular cloud service that you subscribe to, is costing you at the end of every month. Another is related to the one I mentioned earlier, is related to rapid elasticity, is known as resource pooling. Resource pooling also gives us the ability to scale up and down, as that when needed. This in a way also work the way, say, a cab service works. If you need to use the service of a cab, you can decide to get a cab to yourself, like doing the Uber. It's just you alone paying for, the Uber cab. Alternatively, you can do a shared cab. So you do a cab and then you wait for other people to come in and then you share the bill, right? So most of the cloud providers, they have a platform where they host a number of their customers, on that platform. So it is a platform for them to host a number of customers. Doing that, they still maintain privacies, between the different number of customers that they are catering for, right? So you can decide to also spin up something of your own, but that's what that term resource pooling means. And finally, we have broad network access. We know that when we do cloud computing, we have the ability to access the resources of the cloud from anywhere we are, using any kind of device, anytime at all, you can access the resource that you have running in the cloud. So the only two requirements that we need to have is one, internet, and then we need to have a web enabled device for us to be able to take advantage of this. So that's a summary, of what we've learned so far about cloud computing. We know what cloud computing is already, and with some of these features now, some of these characteristics, so I believe we should be up to speed with what I've been talking about so far. So today's topic proper is going to be termed myth of cloud computing, cloud computing misconceptions. So there are a number of misconceptions that people have when they want to consume resources in the cloud, or that they want to go with a cloud provider. So I'm going to be mentioning a few of them, so maybe about 3 or 5 of them, depending on how much time permits us to do today. So do we want to go on a short break, and then we'll be back in a little bit?
Okay, it is still the Tech Talk Wednesday show. If you want to join in the conversation, just make sure you keep this number, save it up, so when it's done, you can ask your question. The number to do so is 0805 5555 957. 0805 5555 957.
All right, so you're welcome back. So again, today's topic is a myth, that is misconception that people have about cloud computing. So let's delve straight into the myths now. So myth number 1, that's the misconception number 1 that people have about cloud computing, is a number of people think that there is only one cloud, only one cloud. So that isn't very correct. There are a number of cloud computing options that we can leverage on. Number 1 is something known as public cloud. Public cloud. So this is similar to how we consume electricity now, even in Nigeria. So we plug into the electricity grid, so either you're using, is metered now, the metering system now is different from how we used to have it in the past, where, the people from the electricity company, bring us monthly bill. But now what we do is, you recharge your meter, so depending on how fast you're able to consume it. So that is how, it is. So there's public cloud. With the public cloud, those cloud providers like Microsoft Azure, they use that platform to host a number of their customers, on that same platform, right? Without, any kind of security concerns. So they make sure that, they take care of all of those different concerns using their own public cloud offerings. Number 2 is private cloud. So that's another cloud option. So this cloud option is owned usually by one company. So it is a data center. It is where, a company, an organization is trying to simulate what the public cloud providers, already have in place. But they don't want to have a mixture of, they don't want to have their information, mixed up with information with from other organizations, so they prefer to set up their own. So when you have that kind of a setup in place, it is known as private cloud. And there is also a way to sit between the two. You put some of your information in the public cloud while you host some you create a private cloud of your own to host some of that data. So that synergy is something known as private cloud. So now so when we talk about cloud computing, you have the option of either going with the public cloud option, doing a private cloud, or having an hybrid scenario, a concatenation of the two in one. Number two concern, or number two misconception that people have about cloud computing is around security. So with security, a number of people will tell you, oh, cloud is is less secure when you compare it to doing our computing on premises. So people have the security fear. If I put my data in the cloud, how am I sure that the data is not going to get into wrong hands? Yes, that's something that any business need to worry about, because if their vital information, imagine the trade secret of an organization getting into the wrong hands. I mean, it might put that particular organization out of business. So it's something that people really need to be wary about. Yes, there's no doubt that when we do cloud computing, we lose some control, but nonetheless, we cannot compare the kind of security that we're going to have when we build our own network with the kind of security that these cloud providers have put in place. So it's going to be very expensive for us to mirror the kind of security that we have, for instance, on Azure. I'm not saying that it's not doable, but it's something that is really going to be very expensive to mirror. So a number of times when we hear that we have this vulnerability, or there's a crack, a kind of a crack with some of the cloud provider, it doesn't mean that the hackers or the crackers have have tried to crack into the data center of these data providers. What it means is that they've been able to exploit the vulnerability associated with the service that they are running in the cloud, and that is left for the administrator of that organization to cater for. So if you're doing Azure, it doesn't necessarily mean that Microsoft is now going to be responsible for a number of the services that you're consuming up on Azure, depending on the model. So most of the time, you still need your administrator, to get a few things done. So there's plenty of security that we have when we do cloud computing. So up in the cloud, you have security measures in place to include things like encryption, things like multi-factor authentication. There is also a place for training, regardless of how much security we have in place, we still need to ensure that our users are adequately trained. So when they are trained, when they have this security awareness training, then they don't fall prey to what is known as social engineering. So that number two myth that I've talked about now. So the argument, the talk that doing cloud computing make you more vulnerable is not entirely correct. Number three, we have this misconception where people say that the cloud is too expensive. The cloud is too expensive. Yes, the cloud can be expensive or not expensive depending on what you have running in the cloud. So this is relative. So the cloud can be expensive depending on things such as the number of users that you want to have running in the cloud, the number of applications that you want to use, the application that you are going to be running in the cloud. Is it going to require software licensing? Is it going to come with some licensing requirements? So all of those things is what you need to put together that would determine if your cloud your cloud consumption is going to be expensive. But when we still compare this with the traditional way of running our softwares, you need to make sure that you have the infrastructure in place. You need to make sure that you You buy the servers, you buy the necessary softwares, you buy licensing. You need to have manpower in place to man those systems. Keeping in mind that after a period of 3 to 4 years, you still need to do an upgrade, and it's also going to come with a cost. But when you do cloud computing, it frees you from all of those worry. You don't have to worry about things such as power. You don't have to worry about those upfront costs. So you really need to put pen to paper here to do the calculation. See how many number of users you have when you're doing the cloud versus when you're doing it on premises, and then you can use to arrive at a figure that makes sense for your business. So if you have, for instance, 5 users, I bet you have a few number of users. I bet you that cloud computing is going to be less expensive for you when you compare it to doing the traditional ways of doing it, which is to have an on-premises kind of setup in place. Number 4, misconception that people have is that cloud computing marks the end of the IT department. A number of the IT people have this fear that once they go with cloud computing, then what is left for them to do? So since most of the activities is going to happen, at the cloud, the cloud provider's end. So it means that they will have to lay off a number of their staff. That is also not very correct. Yes, no doubt. Things such as technical support, job roles will reduce, but administrators are still very much needed to do the setup, to handle the configuration. So the role of the IT professional, the role of the technical people, the role of the DevOps people, the developers, is still very much unavoidable when we talk cloud computing. So that's another misconception. And the final one is SLA, the service level agreements. People have this concern, they have this worry that the SLA is designed most of the time to favor the provider. Well, again, this is where you need your technical end, maybe some of your compliance team members as well, to come on board when you are signing up with the cloud providers, to make sure that they look at your own end as well, to make sure that things are very well. What the cloud provider is putting in the SLA is to your favor, right? But again, when you choose a good cloud provider, to go with, you can be sure that most of those good cloud provider, for instance, the Azure, Microsoft would promise you an SLA, and those SLA most of the time are usually financially backed. So you find Microsoft with their O365, Office 365 offerings, telling customers things like when you do your matrix, you do your measurements, and you find out that people, you are getting less than a certain percentage. You get less than, say, 95%. Don't even bother paying at all, the coming year for your subscription. So they'll give you the subscription the following year for free. If you fall short of 98%, maybe you get to deduct 25% from the next payment that you're making. So you can see the SLA for Microsoft, for Azure, or some of the Microsoft related services in the cloud are financially backed. And when you also ask a number of customers, they will even beat that SLAs that they've agreed to deliver. So if they're promising 99.9% and you do the measurements, most of the time you find it shooting above that 99.9%. So these are some, because of time, I think we should leave it here for questions to come in now. So these are some of the misconceptions, some of the myths that people have about cloud computing.
All right, 53 minutes gone past one. And of course, I really do like the way, he analyzes everything. So even if you don't even understand what a cloud computing is, because of the breakdown, I'm sure by now you would have one or two information about it. So if you want to send in your questions, you can do so. The number to do that is 0805-957. So I'm going to take you on one of the things you mentioned while you were talking, when you made mention of the fact that, so what's the use of, those technical people, as opposed to now that we have the cloud computing. But going forward, another question that I would like to ask is, how do you know at a particular point in time that cloud computing won't necessarily fizzle out other, factors, such that people would say, oh, this is what I want to do, as opposed to anything else? Even there's one thing you mentioned, the one that they place right in the building. I think, is it a hybrid or something?
Okay, the hybrid?
No, the stay something. You mentioned a word. I can't remember
Okay.
word you mentioned, but it has to do with those normal system of, having a server on premises. Exactly.
Okay.
So do you see a feasibility of cloud computing overriding others?
Yes, very true. Whether people like it or not, whether businesses like it or not, the cloud has really come here to stay, and it offers a lot of advantages. That's what I read earlier on before jumping into today's topic. So when you look at some of those offerings, is what any organization, any business-minded person will want to take advantage of.
Yeah.
It costs you less. You don't have to worry about upfront costs. Some of the challenges that people also have with subscribing to the cloud is what I've also itemized today. So whether they like it or not, the cloud has really come here to stay.
But as someone who is very witty about all of this information, if you had to do a ratio or a percentage test, what would you say to how people are very yielding to cloud computing as opposed to others?
Okay, how people are migrating to the cloud? Yes,
in Nigeria.
Even in Nigeria now, the numbers is on the increase. Before this time, you have the banking industry, telling you have this regulating, but CBN will tell you, information is not secured in the cloud, so we're not going to do cloud computing. So I can tell you, even CBN now, also embrace the cloud.
That's really nice.
So it's also nice to know that even if they don't want to go the route of public cloud, if they are not thinking of going with, for instance, Microsoft Azure, people can build their own private cloud.
Private, like
like I mentioned earlier. So there's that possibility, that option of also, them building their own private cloud.
But then does it come with some extra incurred costs if that happens, or it's still on a very normal scale?
Yes, for an organization that want to have a private cloud, yes, it comes with the number of expenses that they need to incur.
Yeah.
Yes, and if they feel that they also want to compete with the likes of Microsoft, why not? So they can also be a public cloud where they are selling some of their cloud offerings to other customers to consume. Why people want to set up private cloud sometimes is for security concern. They feel that what happens if we have a data center in the US and my data is in US? If the FBI from US request for that data, so wouldn't the cloud provider give it to them? So sometimes most of the worries of the business people is around security. But they can have that addressed in the SLA.
Oh, okay. So that can
the service level agreement can cater for that. And the beauty of things is also, I should mention this real quickly, the fact that people necessarily don't have to keep everything in the cloud. We can have this hybrid, kind of cloud that I also mentioned earlier. So if they feel that they have very sensitive part of their network, they can maintain that part still on premises while they move those not so sensitive area of
cloud.
to the cloud. Yes, so that's another.
So you can still have control over that one.
Exactly.
All right. So we have someone, as always, who joins in with Karim, one of the interns that one of the students that intern at the CBT Center, and of course, I would like him to introduce himself and also to know if he has a few questions for Karim. Hi.
Kazim.
Hi, good afternoon.
Kazim, rather.
Everyone. My name is Abdullah, an intern at the LATO CBT 18. And the question I'll just...
Can you come close to the mic? Okay.
And the question I would just like to ask is, people are always scared of putting information on the cloud. And if they're going into a private cloud, that they intend to have a private account just for security purpose and for confidentiality, is there any percentage for the cost incurred?
Okay.
Even if it's going to attract some certain amount of money, it will cost more cost. And what's the benefit they'll have at the end, not putting their cloud to the public and keeping it privately?
Okay.
In terms of cost, yes, it's going to cost them a bit more. But they know once they have a private cloud, they are in total control. They are in control because it is being set up by them. They for any company anyways that want to set up a private cloud is not for a mom and pop kind of business. It's going to be for businesses with multiple regions all around the place. They have a number of regions around where they all want to connect to. So it doesn't make any business sense for a small organization to have a private cloud set up. But for the very big businesses, yes, they know they have the funding, and maybe they've done their math and they figured that it's going to cost them less to do a private cloud of their own versus going with the public cloud. Or it might even be a requirement, a regulatory kind of requirement, where the regulatory body is telling them, no, you are not allowed to keep customers' record in the public cloud. So they can tell them, hey, yes, we're leveraging on cloud computing, but it is our own private cloud here. So so
it really doesn't even make sense for someone, a very small scale business, to actually do that, as opposed to make that investment, because it's really huge. Because of time, oh my God, it's 2 already, Kazim. We need to go. Thank you so much for this very exciting topic. We look forward to next week as well. I think that's when we'll be starting.
That's when we're going to be starting the Power series. The Power platform starts next week.
So we gave you a hint already. Keep your fingers crossed for what's going to be coming up next week. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you also for coming as well, Abdullah, right?
Yeah.
All right, great. The Lunch Hour Drive continues. This is 95.7. My name is Chocolate.